Hi, welcome to part 5 of our Spaceship Blaster game tutorial. In this last segment, we're going to be doing a couple things. We're going to be adding a frame to our scene. We're going to be adding a scoreboard so that each time we hit a ship, the score counts up. And we're going to finish off by adding some sound effects. So, before we get into the actual work, I just wanted to say a couple things about game development. So even a simple game like this, it takes me an hour or so to work through all of the pieces and see how they fit together and get them all working before I even attempt to shoot one of these videos. So whether it's adding some effects, it takes a lot of trial and error to get things just right. And when writing scripts, it rarely works the first time. In fact, in my job as a programmer, I'm really surprised if something works the first time. You work through errors, you work through things just not working the way you think they are, and again, it takes a lot of work to get things just right. So if you're just starting with game development and you're a little frustrated because things just aren't working well, you just got to keep at it and celebrate the little victories, right? Set small goals for yourself, and when you meet those goals, you can feel good that you're actually making progress. The other thing about using these tools is it takes a lot of practice. The more you use them, the more comfortable you get with them, the quicker things will go. So hang in there and follow my videos, and let's create some games together. So why don't we put our programming glasses on, dive in, and finish off this game. All right, so if you remember from our last tutorial where we left off, we had added these extra planes around our just one plane floating in space. We added some terrain in the background to kind of frame that out, and we had added our planet. We added our special effects with our laser and our little explosion. Actually, that was on the previous tutorial or game step 3. And we had broken apart our ship in Blender and blasted it into little pieces by adding that explosive force. So what we're going to do for this last step is we are going to add a score, and we want the score to count up, not just to change to the score addition that we're going to add by hitting a ship. But instead, we want it to kind of animate and count up, and had some sound effects too to give it a little bit more life. What we're also going to do is add a frame, because we don't just want the score sitting floating in space. We want it to have a frame around it, and adding a frame around the screen makes it a little bit more polished. And the last thing we're going to do is add some sound effects when we blast the laser, and when we hit a ship and add the fireball, and when we're counting up our score. So the first thing we're going to do is add a frame. So what we need is an actual PNG of a frame that we're going to add to our Unity scene. So what I did, and I've used this a number of times, is I actually use Unity to create my PNG. I'm not going to go through this. It's a whole tutorial in and of itself to actually create this frame with the glowing tubes here around it. And if you're interested in me going through exactly how I made this frame, add it to the comments, and I can create another tutorial to kind of go through the steps that I went through to make this. But basically what I have is I have a plane here, and I created some materials. Again, I could do some more tutorials on actually creating materials in Blender, but I have kind of a gray granite looking material for my frame. And then what I did is I added a bunch of cylinders around the outside. You can see all these cylinders, and what I did is I added a emission color to that. And so what that does is it kind of makes them glow. And so if you look here and we zoom in, you can see there's a little glow around each one of the cylinders. And that gives us kind of a cool neon glow effect. And I played around with some colors here, And if I highlight all these cylinders, I can change the color to something else. So like green, I tried a green glow. I thought the red glow would look pretty good, but it ended up not looking as good as a purple glow. I also tried some blue glow, but the purple glow, I really liked how it went with the rest of our game. So I created my meshes, and then I set my camera to be straight above looking down, and then I went into render and then just said render image. And what that's going to do is it's just going to render my glow image, and I exported that and trimmed around it with just a paint program. If you go to this image, you can just say save as, and you can save it as a PNG. And then what I did is I drug it into our images. As you recall, we had our other image folder where we used our other palettes and our blue rect and our white rect, and you'll see I have a purple frame here. I tried a couple other frames. That glow frame was my blue one and my red one, and like I said, the purple one I thought looked best. And what you got to remember is this texture type. You need to remember to change it to Sprite 2D in order to add it as a UI element. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a UI element to my scene. So what I'm going to do here is right click, click UI, and add an image. You can see it has a default name. I'll name this frame. Then it puts just this default white image, and it centers it in the middle of the screen. So what we want to do is we want to change the source image, and I'll grab my purple frame. I'll drag it into my source image, and now we see our purple frame. And it's kind of small in the middle of our screen. But what we want to do is we want to stretch it so it always stretches to the borders of my game window. And so how we can do that is we can go over here to this icon here, and if we click on it, we can change it from center to stretch in the vertical direction and stretch in the horizontal direction. You'll notice it didn't change, and the reason is because it set a position for it, left, top, right, and bottom, to maintain its current position. And we don't want that. It also restricts its size because we have a left and a right defined, so it's only going to be the size that the PNG came in as. It's kind of hard to understand the rules sometimes of this, and it takes a little bit of experimentation to kind of understand how it's working. But if you set these all to 0 and this to stretch, what it does is it's going to stretch to the bounds. So you can see now we have our purple frame around our outside. I also had made a black area in where the score is going to go because we want the score really to be on a black background and not on the texture background. All right, so now what we can do is we left click on our canvas, right click, UI, add a text element, which we will call score. And what we're going to do is we want to position that right up in our score area. You can kind of see it's very hard to see there because it's kind of gray color. So we're going to change our color. We're going to change it to white. We're going to make it a little bigger. Let's try 24 point. That looks pretty good. Here's our default text. We're going to add in 6 zeros. All right, now we need to position it up in our score area. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this icon again. We're going to make this top center. And you'll notice it changed our position to move it down into the middle again. So we're going to change that to 0. Now it's kind of up above our score area. So we're going to change the position to, say, -20. But still not kind of centered, and that's because we have this alignment is left aligned right now, and we want that center aligned. So by center aligning our text and center aligning its position, it's now right in the middle of our frame. And we moved it down by 20 pixels. Now this 20 pixels is actually dependent on the size of our screen because it's actually stretching our graphic. So, and I'm not going to go into it now, and I could again do a whole nother tutorial on UI elements and proper scaling and positioning in order to make them always fit no matter what your screen size is. There's a bit more math that we would need to do in order to make it exactly positioned and sized correctly. Because if I have on a much smaller screen, I may even want to shrink my font size or grow it if I'm on a larger screen. But for now, we're just going to take the simple route, fix font size, fix position, and this looks pretty good within our scene and our frame. So now what we have to do is we actually have to animate and count up our text. So what we're going to do is attach a script to this component. And I've already made a script, and I'll walk through that script. Took a bit of playing around with to get it all working properly. And I call that script scroll controller. So if we go to scroll controller, we can see that it has an external variable that I expose called the score. And it is a text type. And we'll see when we look at the script how I did that. So I'm going to drag our score into it. Normally we can access the game object that our script is attached to. The problem is our text is not a game object. It is a UI object. So we can't access the object directly from the script without getting an instance from it from the outside. So I drag that in there. All right. So we have our script, we have our score script. Now what we're going to do is go into the script and we'll kind of walk through how this is all working. Oops. All right. I wanted to make this a little bigger. Where is that frame? There it is. All right. So let's scroll up to the top. We're in our score controller. And I'm going to, before I forget, I'm just going to, because I did this all ahead of time, I'm going to comment this out just so I can go through this a step at a time. All right. So what we have is we have some member variables here that I have exposed. But first of all, we have this public variable text called the score. By making this public, it makes it accessible through Unity. I was originally going to access this directly from another script, kind of changed my mind, never really changed this back. This really probably should be a the serialized item instead of public, but public works just as well. So this allowed me to set the score that I want to operate on. So I have a couple other variables here. I have some static variables. I made a function to adjust the score static. And the reason I did that is it makes it really easy to access it from another class. And I have one and only one score. If you only have one instance of an object, you can make things static. By static, that means that really there's only one instance or version of this script that exists. And that's fine for our score. And again, it makes it easy to call. And you can see when we go to call the function to adjust the score, how that works. So I have some static variables. I have current score. That's the score that's going to be displayed by the text. I have score count up to. So when I want to adjust a score, I am going to reset this variable, and I'm going to animate the current score until it reaches the score to count up to. I want to adjust how fast it counts up. If it counts up too slow, it could take 10, 20 seconds to reach that score, and I don't want it to increment that slowly. So I have a count speed adjust variable. Also, when I add the sound, I also don't want to play a sound every time that I increment my score, because if I did and it played the sounds too rapidly, the previous sound wouldn't even finish before another sound starts, and it sounds very strange. It takes a little playing around with to find out what will actually sound good. That's why it took me a bit to get all this working and sounding correctly. I have my count speed. The combination of the count speed and the speed adjust is going to affect how fast that those numbers count up. You'll see how I use those. And I have my time between sounds. This delays so I don't play a sound every time. So I'm going to play a new sound every 0.1 seconds. All right. So at our start, we initialize our current score and sound time count to 0. And we set our score text to equal the current score as a string. You'll see what this function does in a bit. So what we're going to do is every time we update, we want to check if our score to count up to is greater than current score. And if it is, we are going to add to our current score. And the amount we're going to add is going to be the time, so that every time we come through here and the delta time increases, the score will increase, and it'll increase by the amount of current count speed times count speed adjust. So that is going to increase our score. If our current score is greater than score to count up to, we're going to make them equal, because current score could be calculated to be greater than, it's not going to land right on it as we are counting up to it. So we have to make sure that we don't increase our current score too much. And then we're going to set our text to that score, which is an integer. Remember, this score is an integer, and we need to get it as a string. Now, normally we could just do a toString on it, and that's pretty easy. But I made a function because I want it to be a toString, but I always want there to be 6 digits in the score. So if the score is 10, I want it to be preceded by 4 zeros. If it's 1,000, I want it to be preceded by 6 zeros. So what this is going to do is it's going to convert it to a string, but always make sure there's 6 digits. That's what this D6 does for us. So we're going to get the score. We're going to set the text to it. Now the last thing is, how is another script going to adjust our score? So that's why I made this static function that calls add to score, and it is passed in an integer, the amount I want to add. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that score to count up to equal to the current score plus the score amount I want to add to it. Pretty simple. The speed adjust is going to take the amount to add and divide by 100. And what this does is if I add, say I want to jump up 10,000, or say I want to jump up 100. If I jump up 100 and I had the same speed, meaning the same amount to increase each time through the loop, that if the 100 took, say, 1 second, 1,000 would take 10 seconds, 10,000 would take 100 seconds. That's a problem. So the bigger that I want to adjust the score by, the faster it's going to count. So this kind of will make it so even small numbers will count up and big numbers will count up to relatively about the same amount of time. And again, you could play around with this adjust number and the speed in order to get the right amount of time that just feels right. And again, this is why it took some trial and error. All these things take trial and error. I messed around with this maybe for a half an hour trying out different methods, different numbers in order to get something that seemed to feel right. That felt like it didn't take too long, but took long enough that it was kind of cool to watch it count up. All right. So we have our source control, or our score controller. Now, who's going to call this? Well, the projectile handler, if you remember from the previous tutorials, is the the script that handles when our projectile strikes a ship. If you remember, we get this on trigger enter, and the collider gives us the object I collided with. And what we are doing is we were replacing our ship with the little fractional ship and adding the explosive force to it, and adding that back to the scene and calling about to destroy ship. So after that, what I've done is I've added an additional set of code in order to set the score from the ship we just hit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the spaceship controller script, check to make sure it's not null. Now it'll be null because if we hit something that's not a ship, like one of the little fractional pieces, this is still going to get hit, but it's not going to have a ship controller. So you want to check to make sure it's not null. And then if it's not null, we're going to get the distance from the blaster, because the further away it is, the higher the score we're going to compute. And then I'm going to take that distance. And remember, the middle of my plane is at 0. So if I'm at position 0, I won't have any score. And I don't want that to happen. So I want to add it. And actually, it ended up being -1 because of rounding factor. So I add 11 to it. So if I'm at my first row, this is going to be 10. Second row, it's going to be 20, and so on. And then I'm going to multiply it by the point value I gave my ship. And if we remember, let's go back to our ships. And if I select one of my ships, I select my large ship, you can see the point value in the large ship was 10, right? And the point value for the small ship was 30. So I'm accessing this point value inside of my script, because I got the spaceship controller script and I grabbed the points was a public. And remember, publics can be accessed by another class. If this points was private, I wouldn't be able to access it. But since it's public, as soon as I have the script, I can access its value. So I access the script.points, multiply it by my distance, and that's the score I'm going to add. You may want to subtract score maybe for every time they shoot, so you can't just keep clicking and shooting, and maybe that decrements your score. You can adjust this score computation just to adjust the playability of your game. This is just a sample game. If you're doing your own game, you're going to want to figure out what makes the game challenging, right? You don't want to make it too easy. You don't want to make it too hard. So this type of computation right here is what you'd have to adjust. So we're going to take our score controller, and since it's a static, I don't need an instance of this class here. See, I can just use the class name and call that static function. So that makes it very easy and very handy in order to access this this function. So it's going to call add to score. It's going to come into our score controller. It's going to call this function. It's going to set that score to count up to and count up our score. So let's build this. So remember, when we build it, it's also going to save it. Unity also builds and compiles our script. I always build it from in here to make sure there's no errors, because I'm going to have to fix it in here. It also saves it. So then when we go back to Unity, Unity sees that the script has changed. So it's actually going to build it again. All right. So now let's play our game. And you know what? I'm going to do one other thing before we do this, because I had done something ahead of time. I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this because we need to go over the steps of how I added that audio after I demonstrate all of these video pieces. Like I said, I worked all this out ahead of time. Can't really do any of this. It never works the first time, right? So I always have to work it out ahead of time. So you can see that every time I hit one of these ships, my little score there is counting up. You'll see it's a little higher since this screen is a little bigger than when we first set it, when our game view is smaller. And like I said, it takes a bit more work in order to get it to appear exactly in the same spot. I'd have to actually scale that position based on the size of my screen, the vertical size, but I'm not going to go through all that. It's a bit more complicated. And like I said, I could do it if people are interested in UI elements and how to get all that scaling correctly. I can do another video on that. Just put it in the comment section. All right, so we have our score counting up. And we have our frame looking pretty good. The last thing we're going to do now is do those audio pieces. So I had undone those audio so I could kind of walk through the steps of adding the audio. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our laser and we're going to add some laser sounds. So what we're going to want to do is add a component, go to audio, go to audio source. You'll see our audio clip needs to be filled in. So what I've done is I've imported some audio. I made this folder for our audio. And if you watch my opening video of that turret and the laser blasters that it was coming out with, it has a laser sound. So I just grabbed that laser sound and I dragged it into my Unity project. So I'm going to use that for my laser blaster. So let's grab that sound. Let's drag it into audio clip. And this play on awake is checked by default. That's what we want. We don't want it to loop. We just want it to play on awake. And that means as soon as the laser is created, it is going to play our audio clip, which is exactly what we want. So what I'm going to do is I want to add one to the fireball. So I'll show you how I got this audio into our project. Same method as our meshes and our PNGs. So I have our tutorial samples folder with some wave files. All the audio that I'm using are wave. You can use MPGs for this also, but it will compress the wave files, and that's actually recommended from what I've read. So I'm going to grab this small explosion. It's another wave file I've made before. I did make all these audios. You can find audio files on the internet. You can buy discs of audio files for different sound effects. I like to make everything myself just because I like to know how to do things. And if, again, people are interested, I can do some tutorials and probably will on making sound effects. So I have this small explosion that I just drug in. So what I'm going to do is select my fireball, add component, audio, audio source, grab, got to expand this, grab my small explosion, drag her on in there. All right, so we added a sound effect for our laser and our fireball. Let's see how it sounds. All right. That's a lot to a game, adding sound effects. So you can see our score counting up. All right. Last thing we want to do is add a sound effect when we count up our score. And we can't do it the same way we did the other audio clips because our score always exists. So it's not like I'm creating it. And so I can't do play on awake. But what I do need to do is I need to add an audio source to it. So what I'm going to do is do the same thing as our other two, add an audio source, expand it, grab our ball score. It's another audio that I'd done for another game. So what we don't want is play on awake here because we don't want to play it at all until I ask it to play it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call that play function from my script code. So let's go into here to our score controller. I wrap our sound in this region. It's a handy way of collapsing code and organizing your code is by using these regions. I use them quite a bit if any code file gets too big. And what I do is I'm going to uncomment this. This is the line of code here that is going to play my audio source sound. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to, each time through my update, if I'm updating the score, I don't want to play it every single time. Like I said before, if I did, it would all run together and it would not sound good. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do instead is I'm only going to do it if my time is greater than time between sounds, which, if you remember, is 0.1 seconds. So it's going to play up to 10 times a second, which, like I said, I played around with this, and that's what seemed to sound good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the audio source component of my score, which is that text component, and I am going to just play it. Remember, anything in that inspector window, anything in this inspector window can be accessed from my script code. So the play function is what's called on that play and awake. So I call the play function and I reset my sound time count in order to get this sound to play every time I count up my score. So let's try that out, see how that sounds. It's going to rebuild. All right, laser sounds. Oops. You know what? I always forget this. You'll notice that this little star here because I didn't save this. And if it's not saved, then Unity will not rebuild it into its scripts. Let's try her again. For some reason, when I'm recording these videos, I always forget that at some point. As they say, when it's called the demo demons, when you are demonstrating something, it never seems to work out correctly. All right, well, we got our sound. It is quite loud. So it depends on how loud the sound was when it was made, which is why it's a lot louder than everything else, but we can fix that. So if we go to our audio source, we can come into here with volume, and if let's try 0.2. If you wanted something louder, if we wanted, say, our explosion to be louder, we could adjust that to something bigger than 1. It defaults to 1. So we're going to set it to 0.2. Let's run her again. See how well it works. Again, a lot of these things, you just got to keep trying different things. Seeing better. Still a little too loud, so I'm gonna put it down to 0.1. All right, one last try. All right, let's see how well this works. That sounds a lot better. All right, it's looking pretty good. We got our frame, we got our nice score there, and we got all of our sounds made. It's a little jerky because I'm recording this video at the same time. It'd normally be a little smoother. So the last thing we need to do is actually build our game into a release executable. If you want to publish a game, you're going to need it in a package with an executable, And Unity allows you to do this by going over to our File menu, and if you select Build Settings, you can select the platform you want. We've been building for Windows, and then you just click this Build button, and what it's going to do is it's going to ask you for an output folder of where you want to build it to. So I built this already to this Spaceship Blaster folder, and I'm not going to build it. It takes a little bit of time to build it sometimes, and I've already built it into that Spaceship Blaster folder. So I'm going to cancel here. And now in order to actually see that executable, I'm going to switch over to my other monitor now. Since when you run the executable, it's always going to run on your main monitor, which is not the monitor I'm looking at right now. So let's go over to that other monitor and look at our game. All right, the last thing we're going to do is test out our executable game that we just built. So what we're going to do is I brought up my Unity executable folder. We see our game tutorial.exe here. Going to double click on it. It's going to launch our screen with that default Unity. If we didn't want that, you have to actually pay for the Unity yearly fee. So if you're really going to ship a game, it's not a big fee, but you'd have to pay for that, which is fine because if you're going to make money off of it, you might as well give them a little bit. So we see our ships coming across. We see our glowing frame that fills our screen. You can hear our explosions, our game counting up, and it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. We got our planet in the background. We got our nice looking ships. We got some good sounds. We got our score counting up. So that pretty much does it for our game tutorial. This was step 5. So we went all the way from getting all of our ships coming across, building our ships in Blender, adding some special effects, and showing the ships breaking apart, and our last step of adding our frame and our score and our sound effects. So if you like this tutorial, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my game channel. Like I said, this is the 5th step. If you want to go back and watch all the steps on how all the pieces came together, watch all the other videos leading up to this. If you're new to Unity and you just want to really figure out how to get started, I also have some basic getting started videos to show you how to get this all set up. I'm also going to be continuing on and making more videos on some of the other detailed, more complex things like rotations, and I'm going to do some on some game turrets. So stay tuned and watch for my videos coming up, and thanks for watching.